All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Josh Trees, and I'd like to welcome you to our 2014 training seminars. The first day, what we're going to be doing is you're either going to be here with me, or obviously, if you're not, you're with one of our master licensees and our certified trainers. And the first day is going to be a couple different videos that we're going to watch. They're actually pretty lengthy videos. It's going to take us about 8 to 8.5 hours probably to get through them and then get through the discussion that follows. So just want to let you know, you guys are going to have the opportunity to discuss these videos at different stopping points with the master licensees. We're going to go through everything, pretty much like I've told you guys on the phone, A to Z. We're going to cover it all. And then what we're going to do the next couple days is we're going to get out in the field and actually put all this stuff into practice. So if it's not exactly clear right now in the class, don't worry about it. Your head will probably be ready to explode by the end of the day today. You'll have some time to think about it tonight. And then, like I said, on Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to go through all this stuff. We're going to do exercises. We're going to make sure that you guys are 100% comfortable with this and ready to get out there and make some money when you get home and hit the ground running. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about are the lights themselves. The types of lights that you're going to be dealing with most of the time are going to be either the big bulbs, which are going to come in two sizes that you're going to predominantly use, and that's C7 or C9. Those lights are wired in parallel. And then you're also going to use mini lights. That's going to be your other most common type of lights. Those lights are wired in series. So the biggest difference for your understanding, what you need to know, is that the big bulbs, the lights that are wired in parallel, meaning the C7s and C9s, those lights, it's fine to cut. You can cut them anywhere. They're going to come on 1,000-foot spools, as most of you guys already know by now. And like I said, you can cut them anywhere. You're just going to cap them off. We're going to show you how to do that. Now, the mini lights, when they're wired in a series, it's like the line goes back and it connects into the plug. So you cannot cut the line. If you cut the line, the lights won't work. So you can never cut mini lights. It doesn't matter what type you're dealing with. You just can't cut it. At least none of the ones that we've ever dealt with. I mean, there are some low voltage mini lights out there that we've never even really used. You have to have usually like step down transformers and that sort of thing. But don't even worry about those because you guys won't be using them. So this is going to be all your mini lights, whether it's incandescent, LEDs. And by the way, both of these are going to be available in either incandescent or LEDs. The mini lights are obviously the small lights. Are going to come in different spacing, anywhere from a couple inches up to 6 inches spacing. And it's also going to be like what your icicle lights are. Your icicle lights are also considered mini lights. So just remember, let your guys know. It's almost common sense because all of you have dealt with Christmas lights in the past to some degree. So just keep that in mind. And those are the two main types of bulbs that you're going to be carrying, and then, or lights and strings and so forth. And those are the two main differences. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more detail about big bulbs. And what I'm talking about here is going to be the C7 and C9 bulbs. With the C7, those are available in incandescent in a 5 watt and a 7 watt bulb, and that's considered a candelabra base. C9 is available in a 7 watt and a 10 watt bulb, and that's considered an intermediate base. Now, with LEDs, because these are available obviously in either LED or incandescent, the way that you determine the brightness with the incandescents is obviously the watts. The 7 watts going to be brighter than the 5 watt, 10 watts going to be brighter than the 7 watt. Although, one side note, I really just would say for you to always stick to the 7 watt C9 as opposed to the 10 watt, and then the 5 watt C7. And the reason for that is because you can do longer runs. And I'm talking if you're going with incandescent lights. But that's something that I definitely want you to talk about with the master licensee certified trainers, just to get their opinion on that for the particular regions that you guys are in. Now, when you're dealing with the LED lights, the way that you determine their brightness is by the amount of diodes that are in them. So they might have anywhere from 2 to 5 diodes. Pretty common is going to be either 3 or 5 diodes, and that's how you're going to tell determine the brightness of the LED bulbs. Now, another thing to consider is power issues, and anybody you talk to, any installer that uses LED lights loves those so much more than incandescents. The reason for that is you're not going to have the service calls, easy installations. You're not going to run into power issues when you're doing the installations. So if you can, that's a great way to go. Although it's a lot more expensive. You're talking it could be 10 times the amount, or 6 or 7 times the amount. And on average, with the LED bulbs, you're going to save about 6 times the amount of energy. So definitely something to consider and something that we can talk about more. And I'll be open for any of those questions after the classes. And then why don't you guys go ahead and ask any questions that you have on LED versus incandescents to the guys training you right now. All right, so a little bit more about C9 and C7 lights. They're going to be available in either transparent, which is what we're looking at right now, or ceramic, which we'll look at in a second. The incandescent C7 and C9 transparent bulbs are going to be like you're looking at right here. They're either the clear light bulbs or they're going to have this transparent look to them. Whereas the ceramic, which we're about to see, are going to be more of a painted look, and that's going to be more of like the old-fashioned style. So if you get a customer that's like really wants that classic look, like the multicolors alternating, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the C7 or C9 multicolor ceramic, the what we consider either ceramic or more of an opaque look as opposed to the transparent look, which gives more of a modern look. Now here's a look at the ceramic lights. Like I was saying, it's more of that old-fashioned Christmas-like look. It's the painted bulbs. I'm sure this is probably what you guys had in mind. So it's just real important for you to be on the same page with the customer when you're discussing the job and the details. Make sure that you let them know that you have both options. If we're going with incandescent lights, you have the ceramic, which is more the painted old-fashioned look, or the transparent, which is a little more of a classy modern type look to it. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about the C7 and C9 LED bulbs. They're called retrofit bulbs, and then you're going to want to get the ones that are faceted. So what you guys are looking at are called retrofit faceted C7 or C9 LED bulbs. Now, first I want to point out the bottom two lights. Those are both considered white. So the left-hand side is considered warm white. The right-hand side is considered cool white or pure white. Very important that you talk to customers about this as well. Most people I've found usually like to go with the ones on the left-hand side, which are the warm white. The right-hand side, you can see the pure white or the cool white. They actually get kind of a blue look to them. In fact, they do definitely get somewhat of a blue look. So it's important that you convey that to the customer when you're doing the estimate and let them know, hey, do you like more of that warm white look? Because even in this picture, I mean, they even look a little bit more yellow than in this picture on the left hand side, in my opinion, the ones that we get. So that's just something important to talk to them about. Otherwise, the colored lights, it's pretty much all the same. I mean, you can see all the colors up at the top there. You got your red, purple, blue, green, orange, yellow, and of course, there's a couple of. There's also another example of a warm white and a pure white up there. But I'd say that's probably the most important thing. You don't want to go out and do a job and install a few hundred feet of lights, and then the customer's like, "Oh wow, I thought that looks blue to me." You know, I thought it was going to be more like a different, like a candle light, just like the regular lights. So that's not the case. So definitely talk to them about that. And again, it's easy. These are just called C7 or C9 retrofit faceted lenses, and this will be pretty much the only type of C7 and C9 that we'll have you guys using. And these bulbs, by the way, screw into 1,000 foot of light line, which we're going to get into that here in a second. In fact, I think it's going to be the next slide in the movie. If not, it'll be a couple down the road. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that. And these are the bulbs that you would use for that 1,000 foot of spool of light line. Okay, good. So it was the next slide. This is the bulk light line. This is the stuff that comes in the 1,000 foot spools in either C7 or C9 sockets. As you can see right there, you can see the sockets on it. It's basically X wire with sockets on it. With this, the main variation is going to be two things. It's available in SPT1, which is 7 amp, or SPT2, which is 10 amp. The important thing here is that I will always want you guys to buy the SPT2 10 amp. It's not that much more to purchase it for the difference in the price and the 1,000 foot spools. And the extra 3 amps definitely comes in handy when you're trying to do longer runs. So we'll get a little bit more into watts and amps and all that kind of stuff when we start talking about electricity. But do not buy the SPT1. I always want you getting the SPT2. And this light line works with either LED bulbs or incandescents. Doesn't matter, C7 and C9. And I also want you to note that it's available in different spacing. So you can go like 12 inch, 15 inch. I think you can go down to even like 8 inch. up as high as like 24-inch. I would recommend that you stick to either 12-inch or 15-inch, and that's something that I want you to talk with the local guys about, with the master licensees, and find out what they use. We use a lot of 15-inch, especially on commercial jobs, and you can definitely get away with doing that on commercial jobs. So for sure, always use 15-inch on like shopping centers, strip malls, any kind of commercial jobs. And it is okay to use it on residential jobs as well. But again, that's something that I want you to discuss with your trainers there. So you guys go ahead and do that, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about the mini bulbs. I'm going to show you guys a few jobs that are done with the use of the C7 or C9 lights. What we're looking at here, this is the C9s. Looks to me like those are probably the pure white or the cool white LED bulbs. See how they have that kind of a blue tint to them. Looks really good. I can't tell what the spacing is on these. Looks to me like it's probably the 12-inch spacing, but looks really good. Really nice look. And that's going to be typical for like strip malls, shopping centers, situation like this. Looks like this is a little kind of strip mall, restaurants, that sort of thing. And that's very typical to be decorated along the roof lines with the C9 light bulbs, either LED or incandescent. And with nice thing about with LED lights is you can literally do this whole building with one run all the way, all four sides of it. I mean, that's how far you can go with the LED lights because of the difference in the power consumption. Whereas if you were using C9 incandescents, you're going to have to split it into about 185-foot runs, and then which isn't a big deal. You wouldn't have to split up that many times on all four sides of the building, but it's a lot better when you're working with the LED lights. Okay, we got another really nice job here with the use of LED lights. Looks like these could either be C7 or C9. I'm guessing that they're C9. Obviously multicolor. Really nice look for this house. Really shows off the depths and the different peaks and so forth. Another beautiful job. This is really nice when you go up the ridges like this. Takes quite a bit of time, but it looks really good. I mean, as you can see, it's showing off all the different dimensions, the different depths. All the roof lines are covered in this house, over the door, over the windows. Just a really nice job. And this is actually using C9 incandescent lights. So this is not the LED lights. You can kind of tell the difference in the color. This has a really warm candlelight look to it. Okay, I'm gonna show you one last house here, and then we'll be done with looking at C7s and C9s. So these are C7 lights on a roof line. Looks really nice. These are incandescent lights. And also it's got the C7s going around the garage, which is a really nice look that we'll talk about more. That's putting C7 lights around either garage doors or windows. Makes a really nice, adds a really nice touch, and it's a good upsell, and it doesn't take very long at all to do that. Okay, so a little bit more about C7 and C9. They're mostly used for roof lines, windows, garage doors, walkways and driveways with light stakes, and also large trees. Incandescents are going to use about 5 to 7 watts, sometimes 10 per bulb, while LEDs will use about 0.75 watts. LED bulbs are also much more durable as they don't have a filament and they have a diode instead. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about mini lights a little bit. The lights on the left-hand side, the red lights here, those are incandescent candle tip mini lights. That's going to be the most common type of mini light that you're going to use, not necessarily the color red. It'll actually be more like the ones on the right-hand side, clear, would be the most common that you're going to use. And those are the candle tip as well. These are going to come in different lengths, anywhere from as little as like a 8 or a 9 foot length all the way up to 50-foot lengths. The spacing is also going to vary anywhere between like 2 inches to 6 inches. So you'll see a lot of different options on our website for the mini lights, and there's a variety of different options for you there. Now in the center, we've got the best kind of lights, of course, the LED lights. These are multicolor. They're going to be available in all the different colors, solids, multicolor, warm white, pure white. Those color variations are going to be the same like we talked about with the C7 and the C9 warm white and cool white or pure white. So keep that in mind also when you're dealing with the mini lights. These here in the center, the LEDs, are considered the 5mm wide angle LED lights, and those are the ones that I'd like you guys to use. We found those to be the best. Very, very, very durable, and they also put off a really nice look. The light looks great coming off of these. A little bit more about mini lights. You can get them in clear, which will be the incandescent lights, or the LEDs. You can also get them in warm white and pure white. Solid colors such as green, red, blue, and oranges, purples, just different colors, all solid. Now, the greens and the reds are by far the most popular for solid colors, and then blue would be next in line, followed by the other colors. And then, of course, you have the multicolors like we have displayed right down here below in the right-hand corner. Here's a nice picture with some minis in use. Most of the time, you're going to see minis being used in either bushes or in trees. Sometimes you'll use them around windows, although I think it's a lot better to use C7 lights because you can cut them, so you don't have the issue of having excess lights going around the window. But as you can see here, really nice job of putting the mini lights in these bushes down low, and then also the evergreen Christmas type trees that are in the picture as well. Here's a few more pictures of trees decorated with obviously using mini lights. These are really extensive jobs. Not all the jobs that you're going to do are going to be this extensive. In fact, most of them will probably be decorating the trees to a lesser degree. But I just wanted to show you some examples of a lot of minis in use and different colors and that sort of thing. A little bit more about mini lights. They're mostly used for trees, bushes, fences, arbors, and flower beds. LEDs are going to use around 6 times less power than the incandescent minis. The LED bulbs are much more durable as they have a diode as opposed to a filament. Just like the C7 and the C9 like we were talking about, they're going to be much easier to work with. They're much more durable, take a lot less power, so the installs are going to be way easier than with incandescents. However, they are a lot more money. They do cost a lot more money than incandescents, the LEDs do. All right, so icicles, there's going to be a handful of jobs that you're going to do every year with icicles. Luckily, they're not as popular as they used to be when we first started doing this. Everybody wanted icicles. The one thing with icicles is it's very important that you stretch them out. You want to have them dangling down properly, so you need to stretch them out. A good thing to do is stretch them out at the warehouse before you actually get out to the job, so you can have your guys stretching them out and then put them in tubs. Icicles can be a little more difficult to install, and I would definitely say that's the one type of light that you only want to do LEDs. Again, with icicles, I would recommend that you just do LED lights. The reason is if it gets windy, they're going to blow around a lot. They could actually blow up into the gutters. So they're going to take a lot of abuse. And the other thing is they're fairly short strands. They're like 6 or 8 or 10-foot strands. So that's another reason you need to use LEDs. Otherwise, if you're covering 150 feet of roof line, you're going to have to get pretty creative with the power outlets and the splits that you're doing. So again, icicles, luckily they're not as popular as they used to be. You probably won't get as many requests for them, but I would strongly recommend that you go with the LEDs. You can use the incandescents, but again, these are going to be a lot easier, and it really becomes a factor with the power and so forth when you're doing icicles. So that's why I would say stay away from incandescents with that. Here's a picture of the most common installation tools and materials. Obviously clips. You're going to use several different type of clips, which we're going to talk about here shortly. Everybody on your crew, every crew member is going to need a staple gun. They're going to need staples. You only need one glue gun per crew. Everybody needs a portable GFCI, every crew member. The light stakes, we got a picture of that. We'll get into that a little bit more when we're talking about the clips here in a couple minutes. Every crew member needs wire cutters. Every crew member needs cable ties. Every crew member needs a utility knife, and every crew member needs electrical tape. So these are going to be the most common installation tools and materials. And of course, you're going to need a variety of ladders, which we've already talked about with you. And if you have any questions on that, just talk to your master licensees about that, about the different sizes and the quantity of those ladders that you should get. Okay, another item that every crew member should have is some sort of a tool belt. Doesn't have to be anything very fancy, just as long as it has enough room for them to carry the wire cutters, their staple gun, and then it's also nice when you get some of them that have the big pouches where they could carry at least like 50 bulbs or a few boxes of bulbs. So when they're up on the ladder, the more that they have to come down and get materials and that sort of thing, the longer it's going to take you. So you don't want to be penny wise and dollar stupid in this regard. You definitely want to have adequate tools and equipment for these guys to work with to make them much more efficient. Here's some different clips and stakes that you're going to use. These are the most popular ones that you'll be using and really the only the only types of clips that you're going to have any need to inventory. First, we've got the Omni clip. That's also called the all-in-one clip sometimes. We've got the all-in-one plus next to that. Then we've got the parapet clip, the shingle tab, the adhesive clips for the mini, and then we've got the light stakes, which are available in 5-inch and 7.5-inch. And momentarily, we're going to talk about the different uses for these types of clips. Okay, so now let's talk about installations on roof lines, and we're going to be dealing with shingles, gutters, tile, and staples. So I want to talk to you guys about the different types of clips that you're going to use for the different applications. First picture there to the right of the text, that's using the Omni clip. We're going right across the gutter line, very straightforward, very easy type of installation. They come down super easy as well. Then the next picture, the first one that's going to be on the second row there, those are shingle tabs going underneath the shake roof. Those will also work on a wooden roof. Then we've got another picture of the shingle tab in use going up underneath the shake roof tile, and that's actually, or I'm sorry, the shake shingle, and that's up a little bit. So that's a different look. It's not going right along the edge of the roof line. It's definitely a less popular look. Sometimes you might get a customer requesting that. This is also a way that you could potentially decorate the ridge lines of a house. Third picture on that second row is another picture of the Omni clip, just more of a close up of that going along a gutter. It's a great clip to use. Right here, we've got the Omni clip being used with a shingle, and it's facing down, which is not the most popular way to do it, but at nighttime, you really don't notice that much of a difference. My preferred way would be having the lights pointing outward like they are in all of these other pictures, or at least the first four that we talked about. The next picture, we've got the all-in-one plus clip, and that's going on the shingle as well, on the shake shingle. And then we've got one more picture of the Omni clip facing outward on the gutter. All right, so on the left-hand side, we've got a picture of the all-in-one plus clip holding icicles. So that's where that all-in-one plus comes into play. It's got that spot up top for the C7 or C9, and you can also use that top spot to actually use mini lights. In the rare occasion that you ever had somebody that wanted to do mini lights on a roof line and you were using gutter clips. But what I want you to look at is that little hook at the bottom. That's perfect for the icicle lights. So this is pretty much going to be your clip if you're doing icicles, and as long as there's gutters available to do it on. I didn't have a great picture of lights actually on the tile roof, but we'll do some examples of that in the areas that we have tile roofs. We'll actually put some lights on the tile. That's mostly just going to be the West Coast that we're concerned with that. Most of the other areas in the United States, tile roofs are not very popular, so it's not even a concern. But we will practice that and show you guys how to do it. And the lower picture there is actually showing the Christmas lights stapled along the fascia board. Now this picture, they're stapled towards the inside, which is not a very normal look. That's usually like if it's for a party or they're trying to light up an area for wedding, just to give it some lighting in general. Like may even be like a permanent type installation. But anyways, we'll get into more details on when you're doing stapling along fascia board here in a few minutes. All right, so on commercial roof lines, the most common type of clip that you're going to use is going to be the parapet clip, and you're going to use a shingle tab with that. So the picture on the top left, the flat part of the clip, that's called the parapet clip. And of course, the shingle tab, which we've seen before on the residential roof lines, that slides into the parapet clip, just like we're looking at on the right-hand side. So the parapet clip will actually be permanently affixed to the roof line with something like silicone or liquid nails. We're going to use a caulking gun like we have the picture of right there. And that's going to stay up permanently. And then what you'll do is you'll slide attach the lights to the shingle tab, slide the shingle tab into the parapet clip, and that's how you'll put the lights up. And at the end of the season, you'll just take them down, the shingle tab portion, and leave the parapet clip up. Now, one product that I strongly recommend that you check into and that you use for any of your commercial installations are going to be the Lightnetics. I'm going to show you guys a short video on that, or actually the master licensees will be showing that to you here in a second. But we have not used the parapet clip shingle tab system since these lights have come out. And I'll tell you, the installations literally take about 25% of the time that it does to do the shingle tab and parapet clip system. The Lightnetics products are a little bit more, but the good thing is that the bulbs are already screwed in, so you don't have to screw in the bulbs. It's a magnetic light system to where these lights just literally stick right to the parapet wall, to the lip of metal that goes along that. So these are really good, and I'm going to go ahead and have them show you a video on these products right now. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about extension cords and X-wire. The X-wire is the stuff that we're talking about on the left-hand side. It's basically lamp cord. We call it X-wire. Most of the Christmas light manufacturers and distributors call it X-wire. And it's available on a 500-foot spool. And you're going to make your own extension cords with these using the female sockets and the male plugs that we see down here below. I always want you to get this stuff in SPT2. Very important. You want to go with the 10 amp, just like with the C7 and C9 light line that we were talking about. And for the exact same reasons, you want to be able to carry more power on it. So with this cord, it'll handle up to 10 amps. If you need to have something that's going to go crossing over like a real high traffic area, somewhere where a lot of kids are out playing, then I would recommend going ahead and going with a grounded cord, like the green cord right here. It's pretty much going to be the same gauge. It's going to be the 16 gauge. It's going to be 10 amps as well. So you're not getting more amperage. It's just more insulation, and it is actually a grounded cord. Whereas the X wire, you can see on the plugs, it's not grounded, so it doesn't have the ground protection on it. And then also the 10 gauge extension cord, if you get up to where you need to have something that's running 15 amps, if you're doing multiple light line, let's say into one outlet, one plug, then even if you're separating that light line, which is fine, and to where it's only carrying 10 amps, let's say on the light line itself, you're going to need a thicker gauge cord to handle all the power of like the combined lights and the light line. So this gets into if you're using like three-way splitters, adapters, you're rarely going to need that 10 gauge extension cord with the 15 amps, the way you're going to be splitting stuff up. But keep that in mind. If you do need something that's a higher gauge to handle that, that's the route that you want to go. And those cords are expensive as well. That cord that we're looking at there is probably, I'd say probably $80 or something. This is something that I'm going to go ahead and let you guys talk about a little bit more with the master licensees. Okay, so here we have our different types of adapters. And again, this is something that I want to have you guys discuss with the master licensees. So they'll go ahead and talk to you about these and what the different uses are for these different type of adapters. One note on the one in the bottom in yellow, I say do not use this type. My reason for that is that it can get crowded. You see they're all three next to each other. So sometimes if you're plugging in certain types of plugs, they'll just get crowded up and you can't even hardly fit it. They're going in, they're all bent and so forth. So definitely use the type up top there, the green one that has the three separate sides. So you guys go ahead and take a couple minutes and talk about these different types of adapters. All right, here's a picture of the stapler that we'd like you to carry. Each one of your crew members should have a DeWalt brand DWHT TR130LH stapler. And you can get the staple guns and the staples for these at Home Depot. I think they might also have them at Lowe's. I'm not sure about that. But if you have a hard time finding these, just let us know and we'll get you hooked up with a source to get them. Now, these pictures below, I just wanted to show you something. We're going to get into a lot more detail on stapling on roof lines here in a little bit. But you see, when we're stapling the light line to the fascia board, we're going to have it about 1 inch on each side. That's where we're going to staple. So that keeps it nice and straight. Sometimes you can get away with just doing it on one side. A lot of times you do have to do it on both sides. But you just want to make sure that you get your line really taut, get it nice and tight and taut, then put a staple in on both sides, about 1 inch on either side. The reason that you want to make it about 1 inch is that if you get any closer to that, then you're actually going to pinch the cord and potentially pull it out of the socket, and you're going to have a dead bulb right there, which could equate to a service call. You don't want that. Okay, so now I'd like you guys to take a moment with the master licensees and go to a couple different websites. I want you to go to our website, the WeSellChristmasLights.com website, look at all the different lights and materials. And then I also have a site that I'm going to have you guys check out for the lighted sculptures, the different yard art and that sort of thing. And you guys can have a little bit of a discussion on that right now. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about installing roofline lights. And the first thing we'll talk about is installing icicles on gutters. Again, I don't think you'll be doing icicles very often, but it is something that it could happen. So I do want to go ahead and touch on this, and then we'll show you how to do this out in the field as well. So when installing icicles on gutters, you want to use the all-in-one plus clip. You want to place a clip about every third or fourth vertical drop. So the reason you're doing that about every third or fourth vertical drop is you want to be able to get it nice and taut. So you actually need to put it to where the horizontal and the vertical wires meet, to where you can actually do that. So when you're putting the clip in there, it has to have something to actually grab onto. And then what you can do is you can to make it tighter, you can actually slide that clip down as far as you need to, and then take any sagging out. So that's pretty much the main way that you want to do icicles. One of the main concerns when hanging icicles is what you should do with the connections. Basically, just let them dangle. They're going to look fine during the day. They won't even be noticeable at all at nighttime. And if you were to put them up in the gutters, which people have done that in the past, I mean, it's a total knucklehead move because think about it, you're putting a connection, electrical connection, up into a gutter, which is obviously going to have water in it at some point when it rains. But, it's just one of those things that your guys don't even think about it unless you tell them. So make sure that you specifically tell them not to put those connections up in the gutters at all and just leave them hanging. That's fine. Another thing you want to do is have them make sure that your employees always tie the connections together. It's real important for removal because when you're pulling the lights down, a lot of times you're not even going to have to be up on the roof or on a ladder or anything. You'll just be using an extension pole. And it's real frustrating if you've got a line of lights coming down and they weren't tied off with the connections and then they just unplug from each other. So anyways, like I said, this is something that we can discuss more when we're out in the field and actually show you what we're talking about. It's definitely more of a visual and hands-on kind of thing. Okay, so now let's talk about a much more common installation, which is going to be installing C7 and C9 lights on the gutters. The All-in-One Plus clip and the Omni clips are both designed to hold the socket of either of these lights, and it's obviously one clip per socket. You want to make an effort to keep the bulb straight, but keep in mind they don't have to be perfect. There could be little tilts here and there, and there will be. They're not going to be pointing exactly the same direction as long as they're all facing out or facing up or facing down, whichever way you're going with it, which, like I said earlier, I prefer that the lights are facing out in any situation if you can possibly get them that way. But again, don't worry if there's little small insignificant tilts in between the bulbs. At night, you're not going to be, won't notice it one bit. They'll look perfectly aligned. You will not notice it at all. So keep that in mind. With wood shingles, attaching lights along the edge of a roof line on the shingles can be done using three different types of clips. You can either use the Omni clip, the All-in-One Plus, or the shingle tab like we talked about. If you want to outline a roof line with lights by stapling them to the peak of a shake shingle roof, you might want to use a larger staple gun. So you might have to get something different than that DeWalt on that one and use a thicker gauge staple as well. That'll go into the shingle and grip better. Now, for those of you on the West Coast that'll be doing some tile roofs, or I guess in any state it's possible to have tile like on a custom house, but tile roofs are real common out in the state of California, so we've had a lot of experience with it. When you run into a situation where there's nothing else to attach a clip to, and it can definitely happen, and you don't have a fascia board to staple along, you're going to have to install clips to the tile along the edge of the roof line. So you probably want to add a difficulty level when doing this. And, with the difficulty levels, we'll get into that when we start talking about the estimating formulas and so forth later today. But you're definitely it's definitely more time consuming when you're putting the clips on the edges of the tile. And again, this is something that we'll show you out in the field. It's pretty rare that you're not going to have a fascia board or something to attach it to, like with the gutters. I'd say maybe 1 out of 10 times is all that's going to happen, but we will go ahead and show you just in case you do get in that type of situation. All right, so now I want to talk about when you're attaching icicles to a wood fascia. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple installation, just depends on the height that you're working at. But when you're attaching the icicles to the house with a wood fascia, simply staple the icicles along the very bottom front facing part of the fascia. Now, when I'm saying the very bottom front facing, I mean, that's maybe a little bit confusing because you could go along the bottom part of that fascia with icicles. That wouldn't be a problem to do that. Or what I'm saying here more specifically is just the bottom of the front of that board. So just right across the bottom line. Either way with icicles will be fine. You can put them either, like I said, in the bottom of the board or on the bottom part of the front facing fascia board. Now, when doing this, you want to think about takedown. It's like you want to have you want to have enough staples in there to keep it nice and tight and taut, but you don't want to overdo it. Don't go staple crazy because remember, you're going to have to remove those staples at the end of the season when you take the Christmas lights down. And that can be a real pain if you've got staples every inch. I mean, just staple as much as you have to. I'd say probably every third or fourth icicle. Now, when you're attaching mini lights to a wood fascia, same thing. With this though, definitely go along the front facing part of the fascia board and right along the bottom of that, because I don't want you to, I want them to be very visible. And since they're not drooping down like icicles, I don't want it to be on that bottom part of the board that I was talking about. So this is something that we can show you out in the field. And like I said, very straightforward, pretty simple installation. And one thing also, with mini lights, obviously, this is something you still need to let the customer know, even though it seems like it would be common sense. The light bulbs are not going to be all facing the same direction. It would just be impossible. So if you get somebody that's like, oh, I want the lights to be all straight, well, C9 or C7 are going to be their only option. That's the same thing when you're going around windows, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But with mini lights, the type of wiring they have, I mean, and the way their sockets are, it's absolutely impossible to have them all facing out the same way. All right, before we get too much further, I wanted to have you guys note something here. You always want to install all types of lights with them on and plugged into a GFCI adapter. Plug them in directly to the outlet before you leave, but while you're working, go ahead and have them plugged into the GFCI adapter that I was telling you that every crew member needs. And you probably have some questions on why we do this and use these adapters, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But just keep in mind, I don't want to have guys that are getting on a job site and not working. Everybody should be working right away. But as soon as the crew leader can get power to them, the sooner the better. Even if it's not going to be the permanent, if it's, let's say it's an outlet that's on the side of the house and eventually it's going to go to the barbecue or something. As long as they just have some power, the crew leader can eventually reroute that power. But you want to have them powered up and going because you want to find out, are there bad bulbs? Do you have a bad strand? Are you going to pop a circuit? So all rule of thumb is always run these lights live. Always have them going live. All right, so let's talk about attaching C7 and C9 lights to a wood fascia. The only time you're going to do this is if you don't have a clip that's going to work. So there's no gutters, there's no good, you can't use shingle tabs, you can't use an Omni clip. It's kind of a last resort because it is going to take you 2 to 3 times longer to remove the lights and staples than is, or when stapling them, than if they're on a clip. When they're on a clip, they basically just come down like dominoes, super fast. When you staple them in, whatever staples you put in, you've got to pull them out. If they pop out while you're pulling them down, then you still have to collect the staples and pick them up off the driveway or wherever they fall. So keep that in mind. And this is the way you're going to do it if you do have to do it this way with the staple gun. So installing bulk light line off of a 1,000-foot spool without the lights in the sockets is going to be the best way to install C7s and C9s on a wood fascia. So you're going to want to place the socket against the very bottom front-facing part of the fascia. Don't want you to put it on the bottom with this because I don't want those lights facing down. I want them facing out. So then you're going to place one staple on each side of the socket, making sure the staple is close enough to the socket to hold the socket straight, but you don't want to make it so close that it's going to pinch or cut the wire due to the raised wire that's going through the rear of the socket. Like I said earlier, you may be able to get away with stapling on only one side of the socket and just keep it nice and taut that way. And a lot of times you actually will be able to do that, but just use your best judgment. Don't skimp and don't end up having to go back to a job because it really needed a staple on each side. But with that, you're going to have to use your best judgment, and hopefully your guys that are out there working for you will too. Now, the distance you're going to want to staple on each side of the socket is going to be approximately 1 inch. Once the socket's firmly in place, take a light bulb and screw it into the socket. Make sure that you or your employees screw the bulbs in firmly and tightly, because if it's not tight in the socket, it'll have a tendency to lose connection and then go out. Usually that doesn't happen right away. It happens 1 to 2 days later. Then that's a service call. So you don't want to have to do it. So make sure these guys are tightening it in there all the way. Again, another good reason to have the lights on while you're doing it, but make sure it's nice and secure in there. Now, when stapling lights, it's always better to keep the bulbs in your pocket or a tool pouch. Secondly, install the light line without the bulbs. And then the third thing to do is screw the bulbs into the socket. So what you don't want to do, the problem with installing incandescent lights, now with LED lights, this would not be a problem. So let me back up a little bit and say, it doesn't matter if you're stapling, if you're using incandescent lights, that's fine. You can bulb them up from the ground. You can have one person that's stapling the lights and one person that's on the ground actually screwing the LED bulbs into the lights. The problem with incandescent lights, and if you're doing it and you're stapling with the incandescent lights, is that it's the jarring. So when you're doing that staple gun, you're jarring the filament and it's rattling that around. And what will happen is you'll end up getting what we call a bright burner bulb, which that filament's essentially weakened, almost busted, and literally it's going to go super bright, and then it's going to burn out within a couple days, resulting in another service call. So keep that in mind. Again, LEDs perfectly fine to screw them in and then staple them. Incandescents, it's not. You got to put the wire in first, and then actually screw. You got to staple the wire first, and then actually screw in the bulb. So keep that in mind. All right, so anytime you're dealing with residential concrete and stucco, there's really no easy, non-intrusive ways to install the lights to either of those surfaces, whether it's stucco, brick, concrete. All those are going to require you either screwing something in or gluing something on there, and it could leave some sort of residue, with the glue. It could definitely leave something on the brick, on the stucco, and if you screw something in, that's obviously going to leave a hole, or it's going to be there permanently. And that's what you have to do for wreaths, for those type of installations, sometimes even lights. If customers want them along an archway, along their brick, then it's not magic. They don't just magically appear and hang up there. We've got to put them on some way. So I think as long as you let the customer know this and they're fine going into it, and you let them know like, hey, it's going to look great. We're going to do that arch for you. It's going to look really nice, but I do want you to know that there could be some glue residue if you're going to end up using glue, or you want that wreath up there hanging in the doorway. We're going to have to put some eye bolts up there, and they're going to be permanent, or if we unscrew them, we'll just end up filling them with silicone or something at the end of the season. But a lot of times if you're dealing with hardware that's going to be screwed in, it's just going to be permanent, and then that way it can be used year after year. But just make sure you communicate all this with the customer. That's the most important part. And just either they're going to say, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and do it, do the permanent install, do the glue, the adhesive, or no, I don't want that. It's not worth it for me to have you do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about peaks and corners and just the transition with them. A lot of people have the misconception, which is understandable, that you need to put a bulb right in the top of a peak or right at the corner as it's going around. So they think that you need to take some slack out of it to place the bulb in a particular spot. You don't need to do this. Just go with what you have going. Just keep the same spacing, the same pattern going. Keep it nice and taut, and you do not need a light bulb anywhere particular on a peak or on a corner. And then as far as commercial roof lines go, let's talk a little bit more about that. Like I told you earlier, I'd really like to see you using the Lightnetics products. You guys hopefully saw that video and you saw how quick that goes. I mean, I'll tell you, since those things have come out, commercial jobs are so much easier than they used to be with the use of the parapet clips and the shingle tabs. But those are going to basically be the two ways that you're going to do commercial installs. Will either be using those Lightnetics or using the parapet clip and the shingle tab system. So if you have any more questions about that, just go ahead and talk to the master licensees about it. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to discuss that. But first, I do want to show you just a picture of displaying like the lights going around the corner. Okay, so here's just a quick picture to show you guys the incorrect way and the correct way to transition around a corner. And while I've got this picture pulled up, because it actually is a good example of the C9 stapled into the fascia board, always make sure when you're using the C7s or C9s, or any type of light for that matter, and when we're talking about going along the bottom of the fascia board, keep it nice and straight. A good way to do that is kind of like in this picture, how these lights are running right along the very bottom of that fascia board. That's a good way to gauge it and keep it straight. So when I was talking about not worrying about the lights with the clips if they're tilting a little bit of a different direction, I wasn't talking about lights that are stapled. With stapled lights, it is very important that you keep the line nice and straight. And again, the best way to do that is just running the lights right along the bottom of the fascia board. Okay, and now I'll let you guys go ahead and talk a little bit about the commercial installations and the roof lines. Okay, so pillars. Now, usually when you're wrapping pillars, you're going to do it with mini lights or C7s. I like to use the C7s if you can. It's just a matter of if the customer's going to let you do it. I still think they look really good. And the good part about it is, of course, you can just cut it whenever you're done at the top. But with the minis, it's a little more challenging because you got to try to keep the spacing even going up the column, and then you got to figure out what to do with the excess lights at the top. But you can always just wrap them up, and there's usually a spot that you can tape them up to at the top, or just kind of set them up there, wrap them into a ball, and set them at the top of the pillar. There's usually something up there that you can do that with. But Basically, what you want to do is you always want to wrap the pillar from the bottom up with your end in your with your female end at the top. Obviously, you're going to start with your power at the bottom with your male end, and just wrap all the way up. And then, like I said, try to keep the gaps, or I'm sorry, the spacing in between them as even as possible. And then when you get to the top, you're just gonna have to wrap the excess lights around, or possibly black some of them out, or just wrap them into a ball and set them up there at the top. Another thing is, at the very top, a lot of times it's hard to get it tight enough and wrap around to where it's going to be secure so that the lights don't slip down. So what we recommend doing is running some electrical tape around a couple times and securing at the top, up at the top that way. And most columns are usually white, so you definitely want to have some white electrical tape on each truck for sure with each crew. Now, in addition, some things that you want to remember when you're doing pillars or columns, always wash your hands before wrapping the pillars because usually they are white and you get handprints all over them, and then the customer is going to be angry and you're going to be out there with a sponge wiping them off. If it sounds like I speak from experience with this, it's because I do. You get some knucklehead out there, hands are all black. Next thing got the lights on there. That's great, but they're filthy, and then you're having to go back with a towel and wipe it all down. Usually, hopefully you catch it while you're there, but let's not even have to worry about doing it at all. Just make sure that these guys wash their hands before they start wrapping them. Always use ladder pads if you're gonna have a ladder leaning up against it. Before using the ladder, you also need to check to make sure that both the pillar and especially the base are made of a solid material and not foam. I've had it happen also where heavy guys on a ladder leaning up against the it's usually the top part, not the column itself, but sometimes it could be the column, and it's actually just made out of a foam material on the inside, and it just like stucco on the outside, and it'll just poke right through there. So I don't know. I mean, the best way to do that is like knock on it, see if it sounds hollow or if it's solid. I mean, if it's hollow, then it's going to be that foam stuff, and you don't want to put much pressure up against it with the ladder. Now, another thing is you want to try to have the lights on the truck with the white wire. If you have to use the green wire, that's okay. It really won't. It'll be okay at night. It's just during the daytime, it's really going to stick out. So try to have some white wire lights in stock so that you don't have to worry about the green as being an issue. You can just use the white wire all the time with the pillars. All right, so let's talk about iron gates and putting lights on those. The most common type of lights that you're going to use on iron gates are going to be either mini lights or the C7s. Now, I'd say the most important thing when you're doing a gate is to take into consideration where the gate swings open or where it slides in the track. And you need to make sure that you obviously don't get any lights where they're going to get pinched or damaged or create some sort of an electrical issue from getting pinched in those gates. Most of the time, to attach it to the gates, you're going to either use the magnetic lights, are a great choice. That's one of the things that you could do. Or you're going to be affixing them with cable ties, which we also call zip ties, or just simply using electrical tape. So with the gates, it's, a lot of times it can be real integral. There's some neat stuff that you can do with them. You can do like a V pattern. You can do swags. You can wrap it through the different rails of the gate. So with that, just get kind of creative. And when you're out doing your estimating, you're gonna have to price your difficulty level based on how intricate you're gonna get with it. Like on this gate that we're looking at, a V pattern would be real simple. That wouldn't take long at all. You could always double back if you had excess lights on the minis. Another option would be running it through the top of the rails, kind of like it looks like there's little cross-looking things up there. I can't see too good from this picture I'm looking at right here. But anyways, just there's lots of different ways that you could probably wrap this gate 10 different ways. And that's just something that you're going to get with more experience and being out there doing it. Okay, now the swags, the half moons, that's what we're talking about when we put lights on the railing or of a balcony or along a fence line. And then when swagging on a balcony or fence, you're going to have to judge how deep or how long you want to make it based on the size of that balcony or fence. So when swagging a short balcony, you want to make your swags really short and deep, which will enable you to use up all the lights. And then you want to gauge the length of the swag by counting the vertical bars on the railing and then divide the number of bars evenly. So if you run into a situation where the last swag doesn't match the other swags in length, just leave it, and assuming that the difference isn't too immersed, then you'll be fine. It shouldn't be too noticeable at night. If you're swagging along a fence line, you generally want to make very long and shallow swags in order to get the longest distance out of your lights. So that's something that's easy. You guys are gonna you're going to see this demonstrated over the next couple of days, probably tomorrow. So I think this is something that's going to become a lot more clear once we show it to you out in the field. All right, guys. So let's talk about bushes, shrubs, and hedges. The type of lights that you're going to normally use for almost all shrubs are going to be mini lights. The C7s and C9s obviously just are too spaced out, just too big, just doesn't look right in there. So you'll almost exclusively use mini lights on these type of applications. With the lights, you want to place them on the surface of the shrub or less than 6 inches deep, because any lights placed too deep in it or too deep into a thick shrub are not going to be visible. Just become too dark and maybe just a little twinkle light, which you would think it would look kind of cool, but it's it's just that look just doesn't stand out enough. It just almost becomes invisible back there. So you want the lights to appear to be completely random. The pattern is not a precise pattern by any means, but rather consists of many random S turns and filling in gaps wherever you see them. So we call it like an S pattern that you want to use. It's okay to crisscross over the lights while you're making the pattern, but just try to keep the crisscrossing to a minimum. So if you look down at these diagrams below, you want to do a real random pattern. So you want to do like constant S's, not like just one back and forth. I mean, that kind of on the right side looks kind of like an S2, but it's just back and forth. It's like the lines are too straight. And at night, that's really going to be noticeable. We want to just decorate it and just constantly making S's back and forth, up and down, side to side. And I think, these pictures give a pretty good idea of like the randomness pattern as opposed to just sticking with something that's redundant and the same all the way down the bush. And again, this is something that's going to be easier to see when we put it into practice tomorrow when you're actually out there doing the bushes. Okay, so putting lights in thin foliage can actually look really cool. I'm talking about like flower beds or just a random hillside of ice plants. It can actually even look really cool. It adds up a lot sometimes with the lights, but the labor is very, very easy. I mean, you're literally just taking like that same random S pattern like we're doing with the bushes and just putting them on this ground cover essentially. And it's, any type of ground cover, it might look during the daytime like it's just a pile of lights on there, but at nighttime it almost gives it like a snowy effect. It's really cool. Like I said, the only drawback is that it can get kind of costly with the amount of lights that you use, but the labor is so easy and it just looks awesome. So that's something that's good to throw out there potentially as an add-on or upsell for a customer if they've got some nice flower beds or a little bit of slope with some thin foliage out there. That can look really good. Like I said, it just makes it kind of creates like a little winter wonderland. Now let's go ahead and talk about decorating trees. There's two different ways that we decorate trees. The first way is a trunk and limb wrap, also referred to as an inside wrap, and then we also have the outside wrap. Just like the name says with the trunk and limb wrap, we're essentially wrapping lights around the branches and the trunk of the trees, whereas with an outside wrap, we're concentrating on going up the trunk of the tree, but once it splits, we're just doing the outside foliage on that. So with that being said, trunk and limb wrap, you can do it on just about any type of a tree. I guess except for the only type of tree that you really wouldn't do that on would be like a Christmas tree, like an evergreen, just because it's got so much foliage and it's never gonna be real branchy. The leaves don't fall off, obviously. So that's the only type that you don't want to do that on. Otherwise, any type of tree is fair game with that. With an outside wrap, though, you really only want to do that on trees that are like symmetrical, maybe like really nice and round, have thick foliage on them. Like an evergreen tree is perfect for the outside wrap. That's the type of wrap that you would do on that. And then also any type of trees like fall citrus trees look really good. Just keeping in mind, like I said, that you just want to do trees that are nice and symmetrical, round, with lots of foliage on them. Otherwise, if it's just real branchy, the outside wrap is going to be really hard to do and get it looking good, especially since most of your installs are going to be during the daytime. An outside wrap almost has to be done at night on a tree that's real branchy just to make it look good and make sure everything's spaced out correctly. So let's talk a little bit more about the trunk and limb wrap first. The trunk and limb wraps are going to be done with the use of a ladder, such as an orchard ladder or even just a step ladder. Or you're always going to use something anywhere between the size of a step ladder, orchard ladder, all the way up to like a 30-foot extension ladder could be used for the trunk and limb wraps or the inside wrap. It's straightforward method. It's easier to do during the day to get a mental picture of, because basically what you're doing when you do a trunk and limb wrap or inside wrap is you're really just creating a tree of lights, with a smaller tree of lights within that tree. So you're just kind of using the frame of that tree to create a nice nighttime effect and a miniature tree out of that tree. Now that's if they're just going for a basic inside wrap. If they're going for a modern inside wrap, you're going to do quite a bit more of the tree. And if they're going extensive, you're going to do almost the whole tree, about 75% of it. So that's what we really like about doing the inside wraps, is that visually it is a lot easier to do those during the daytime. And like I was saying with the outside wrap, you almost have to be there at night, which is just not feasible to get it looking right. Another thing with the inside wrap or the trunk and limb wrap is it can be done with one person, and then it's more time consuming, and they also require more lights, and then the takedown requires about 50 to 60% of the installation time, but it does look better on most trees than an outside wrap does, so it's really worth it. If you can get the customer to go with the price, then it's well worth it to push that. Now with this, for this type of installation, you're going to use a light ball for this type of wrap, and we'll show you how to do the light balls. That's what we'll show you out in the field, and that's something that you'll actually see tomorrow. Now with the outside wrap, that's going to require two people to do. One of the person is going to, or one of the people is going to be holding an extendable painter's pole with a bent paint roller arm, just to kind of guide the lights and get a grip on the lights. And then the other person is going to be feeding the lights to them, kind of spaced out about 10 feet, and handing those lights and making sure that they're staying on the pole. So one guy's kind of utilizing the pole to put the lights up around through the outside foliage, and again the other guy's just laying the lights out about 10 feet away from them and just keeping them nice and straight onto the pole. Outside wraps are usually faster. They require fewer lights, and takedown is only about 25% of the installation time. So they come down a lot quicker than an inside wrap does. And like I was saying earlier, outside wraps are sometimes difficult to get a mental picture of. It's also difficult to see if you placed enough lights in a tree and if they're evenly placed throughout the tree without gaps. Really hard to determine that during the daytime. So the only way to do that is if you do have a tree with a lot of foliage, then it makes it easy. I almost call it, like, some trees look like a big bush on a trunk, and those are the type of trees that are going to be ideal for doing outside wraps on. Here's some examples of outside wraps for you guys to take a look at and discuss real quick. Okay, and here's one more slide here for you to take a look at. You can see the lower left side, that's got some outside wraps, and those are really the type of trees that I think look good with an outside wrap. You can see they're symmetrical. I can't tell, I think the one closest to the house, or actually the two closest to the house, look like they're probably evergreen trees. And then the other tree, I can't really tell what type that is, but it's got a nice evenness, roundness to it, and those tend to be the type that are the best for the outside wraps. Now, the other three pictures, those are all inside wraps, and I'd like for you guys to go ahead and take a look at these and then just discuss these a little bit more as well. All right, so now for all of us in the warmer climates, obviously there's going to be a big demand for decorating palm trees. And on this slide here, we've got some different variations of the way that we decorate them. The top left, well, obviously you've done the base of the palm tree, and then the fronds, which gives a really cool look. It almost looks like it looks like fireworks exploding at night. It's really cool, very intense. Takes a long time to do, but the effect is pretty awesome. Then the top right picture, as well as the lower right picture, that's what we consider candy caning them. So we're actually taking the palm trees, doing a very tight spacing, like 2-inch spacing. And when I say spacing, what I mean is kind of like with the columns, when you're wrapping around it, that's going to be the vertical distance in between the strands. So as you're wrapping it, you're obviously with palm trees, it's just like columns. You're spiraling around. What you have to determine is what you want that spacing to be. Usually that's going to be anywhere from 2 to 12 inches, depending on the size of the tree. And these happen to be, like I said, very tightly wrapped on both of these, as well as that actually all of these are about a 2-inch spacing in all four of these pictures. But with the candy caning, we do blocks. As you can see right here, we're doing blocks of red, blocks of white, or clear rather, and you just keep doing that, and it basically makes it look like a candy cane peppermint type of thing. So really cool effect with that. Not near as hard to do that as it is to do the fronds. To do the fronds in these palm trees, you're usually going to have a bucket truck unless they're really close to the ground. If they're just really short palm trees. And again, the spacing, that's important because you want to determine a spacing that you're going to do. You're actually going to determine that while you're doing the estimate when you're talking to the customer. And again, that's going to be anywhere between 2 to 12 inches. And that needs to stay consistent the whole way up the tree. Very important. A lot of times I'll have a little, like a piece of cardboard or even a wooden ruler so that the guys can take that. In fact, that'd be a good idea for you guys to put on each crew would be for them to have a wooden ruler so that they can get their spacing correct, especially until they get used to it. And then you can let them know, hey, I want this to be 2 inches spacing, 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches, whatever it is, when the sales guy's out there and that gets determined, and they can keep that even. Anyways, that's really important. You want to have that consistent. And you always, when wrapping palm trees also, you're always going to start with you're going to use light balls, just like you do with the other type of trees and just like you do with columns, and you're going to always start with the male end at the bottom. You're going to have your male end at the bottom, and then you'll end up with a female end at the top of the tree. And the good thing about palm trees is if you are wrapping up to the very top of it, you can usually, it's easy to find a spot to hide the lights, just to bunch them up and stick them up in the fronds, or just there's always an area it seems like to put them. Or if you have to, you're gonna, and the guys will show you how to do this. You just wrap back down and you just do really long spirals, and it's not even not noticeable at all. And here's just a few more pictures of palm trees for you guys to look at. These are kind of cool. This is a shopping mall, and with a palm tree, like I said, it's kind of like a pole or a column. You can actually fix some different decorations on there, like these stars are on here. Really cool look. All right, so wiring the trees, the electrical side of the trees, this is something that's going to be fairly easy for you guys to do with the use of the X wire and then the use of your female sockets and your male plugs. And this is something that it's really hard to explain without actually getting out there and doing it. So this is one of the things that we'll be covering pretty much 100% out in the field tomorrow. All right, so let's talk a little bit about wreaths now. Wreaths are definitely a very profitable added touch, good upsell, I think, something you can add on to an existing bid, even something that for repeat customers that you might offer year after year, like, hey, maybe we could add a couple wreaths this year and just to jazz it up a little bit from the previous year. Now, when choosing a wreath, you're gonna want to fill up about 70% of the area that you're going to put it in from side to side, as well as top to bottom. The main difficulty with wreaths, kind of like the difficulty with doing arches and decorating stuff on brick and that sort of thing, is that it's hard to attach them without being somewhat intrusive. And usually you're going to have to put like some hooks or an eye bolt into that area. But the good thing is, if it's going to be a repeat customer year after year, you only have to do it that first year, and then you're going to be pretty much set. And most of the time, people that want wreaths, they understand there's going to be something up there. They've got to have something to hang them from. So they're usually fine with that. But again, just make sure that you address that with the customer, just like you would with the concrete and stucco and the adhesives and that sort of thing. Rule of thumb is anything that's going to be up there permanent, or if you're drilling a hole in their house, you just need to let them know and make sure that they're cool with it. Some common areas for hanging wreaths are going to be on front doors, above front doors, and then also over windows. Some other good areas for hanging wreaths would be peaks over garages, gates, and balconies. For peaks over garages, if you need to be less intrusive, you can hang the wreath on a thin cable from an anchor screw placed in the eaves. In windy areas, you'll probably need to place 3 anchors, one at the top and one on each side of the wreath. Also, simply hanging the wreath on the screw anchors in windy areas won't be sufficient to hold the wreath in place. What you're going to need to do is take a thin piece of wire, affix it to the anchor screw, and then affix the wire to the frame of the wreath. For gates, fairly simple on gates. Just simply anchor the wreath to the gate in 3 locations. You could either use thin wire, one at the top, one on each side, or you could also use cable ties for this. The only difficulty with gates will be if the wreath is lighted, and in that case, you got to make sure that you're routing the power cord and all that, making sure that it's not any of your cords not getting pinched, just like we talked about with the lights with gates. So you want to open and close the gate several times just to make sure that the wire doesn't get pinched or hung up near the hinges. For balconies, just simply anchor the wreath to the railing in 3 locations using the same thin wire, or cable ties, once at the top and then once on each side. All right, so let's talk a little bit about garland. When installing garland, a shallow swag is more common than deep swags. Try to keep all of the swags even in their length and depth. It's also common to wrap around the top of a horizontal rail when using garland. So below is a list of the common locations for garland. Railing, you can do that swags or horizontal, affixed to the railing with cable ties. So by swags, we already know what we're talking about, like the half moons. And in horizontal, we're just talking about going along the top part of it, just wrapping it throughout the railing there. And again, you want to fix out to the railing using the large cable ties. Balconies, same thing, swags or horizontal, affixed to the railing with cable ties. Gates, exactly the same, swags or horizontal, affixed to the railing with cable ties as well. And then with commercial roof lines, you're going to want to do swags. A lot of times it's going to be, since the roof line is going to be probably a lot larger, they're going to be deeper swags and they're going to be more space in between the length of them. So the best way to do that is going to be a fixed by drilling anchor screws into the roof line or the parapet wall. And if drilling is going to be inappropriate due to water intrusion, what you need to do is glue a piece of wire to the roof line using 2-part epoxy. And hopefully on a commercial roof line, there should be areas that you can do that without it being seen. So it's not going to be a big deal for that to be up there permanently. Okay, now when you're outlining driveways, patios, and sidewalks, you're going to be using the 5 or the 7.5-inch light stakes that we looked at earlier today. It's very important that you keep the lights straight and even. Uneven or crooked lights are going to be real noticeable since they're right on the ground. So really make an effort to keep those nice and straight. It's a little bit different than on the roof line if bulbs are tilting. It won't look good with this. Some concerns with light stakes: the bulbs are going to be facing upward, which is going to allow moisture into the socket. So to prevent water from seeping into the socket, you want to make sure that the bulbs are screwed in really tight. In warmer climates, the areas where the sprinklers still come on a lot, you probably want to ask your customers to turn the sprinklers off for the season, or at least limit their use to the daytime only. And, just have them scale back. They don't have to completely eliminate it, but they do need to switch the daytime watering instead of nighttime watering. Vandalism and accidents. Since light stakes are usually installed close to sidewalks, passersby have easy access for kicking the lights or accidentally running them over. So that could be an issue. Just keep that in mind. Could result in some service calls, but that's something that if it's vandalism or somebody drove over it, that's not your fault. So that's the type of service call that you would charge for and let the customer know that. In areas with hard packed soil or frozen ground, you're going to need to use a screwdriver to punch holes in the soil first, just loosen it up a little bit, and then that light stick will go right in there. Also keep in mind that snow may cover up the lights, but then once it melts, it'll be fine. But if it snows 6, 7, 8 inches, it could cover it up definitely. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to decorating windows and talk about the different types of borders you're going to be working with around the windows, which will be wood borders and aluminum borders. All right, so let's start with the windows that have a wood border around them. In general, with all types of windows, you're either going to be doing mini lights, C7s, or C9s. Those would be the 3 different types of lights that you're going to use. Now, when you're doing it around a wood border, the best option is going to be to staple to the inside of that wooden frame that goes around the window. Make sure that it's not like a really nice painted window. Sometimes it's more of like a hardy board that looks like looks like wood, and in that case, it's impossible to get the staples into. So when you're out there doing the estimate, that's something you definitely need to evaluate and talk about that with the customer. Like it says down below, make sure that the customer knows that you'll be using staples. Because if not, if they don't want you to use staples or worried about the little holes, that's going to leave behind, because it will leave little holes. Most people don't care about that because it's very unnoticeable. But with that being said, if you get somebody that's real picky, then it's going to be a problem. So you can always revert back to the cable tie clip that we're going to talk about here in a minute and stick it directly to the window. And we're going to show you how to use that out in the field over the next couple days. We'll actually demonstrate that for you. So again, the 3 different types of lights are going to be the mini lights, C7s, and C9s. The mini lights are never going to have a straight look to them, which is fine. They're going to flip-flop back and forth. And then with the C7 and C9 lights on a wood border, Pretty much the same thing. I mean, if you wanted to staple every bulb, kind of like you do how we were talking about on the fascia, where you do 1 inch away on each side, you can do that and then you'll get a really straight look, but it's going to be more time consuming. At night, it really looks good, even if they're flip flopping back and forth. So I wouldn't, unless a customer's specifically asking for it, I wouldn't worry about having the lights being all exactly straight and pointing in the same direction. Now, when you're dealing with an aluminum border that's going around a window, pretty much your only choice is going to be to use a hot glue gun or to use this clip that I show down below on the right-hand side, which is a sticky clip, and you use cable ties with it or zip ties. I think that's the best way to do it. It's the most non-intrusive way of doing it. You just need to make sure that the windows are clean. You got to take some sort of Windex to it or some rubbing alcohol, clean it off good. So that's something you should have on your truck as well, would be these clips, and then I'd say rubbing alcohol or Windex. Either one of those will do the trick. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is about a week into it, they'll start falling off just because there was dirt on the window or whatever. So make sure you do that. If you are going to use a glue and a glue gun, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can either glue directly right onto the window and remove the glue later with a razor blade, or you can glue to the brick or stucco or whatever border it's going along that's right alongside the window. Very important though that, again, let the customer know that there could be some glue residue, and that could remain. It could discolor it a little bit. So honestly, we're going to show you guys both ways on how to do this, but I really think that you're going to be a bigger fan of using these cable ties along with this sticky adhesive clip that we're showing here. I think I'd really try to do it that way as much as you can. Okay, now decorating dormer windows is pretty much the same as decorating any window. You're going to be dealing with the same types of borders. The only difference here is that they're going to be higher up, so obviously it's going to be a different difficulty level for you. When you're drawing power from these windows, or for these windows rather, the lights on them, you're going to draw that from the light line, more than likely that's going along the roof line, and you can just run that power up and down from that light line. The guys are going to show, your master licensees are going to show you how to do this. You're going to learn how to make all kinds of different splices and cords and connections by using the X wire. So that's very easy. They're going to show you how to do that and how to, like I said, how to do these different connections. The one thing that you want to keep in mind is you never want to have lights just dangling or going across in an area that's not part of that dormer window or the window. That would obviously look very tacky. It's, almost should go unsaid, common sense, but I have seen people do that in the past, so I just wanted to point that out. Also, when you're putting lights on the dormer windows and running it off the roofline lights, like I said, you're most of the time going to be doing, make sure you incorporate that into the calculations of your overall light line. That's sometimes easy for people to forget. It could end up being an extra 25, 30 bulbs, and you have to incorporate that in just so you're not blowing circuits and overloading your 10 amps that you can go on your wire. So now let's talk about how we're going to get these lights shining bright with electricity, of course. We're going to do a power assessment. We're going to talk about finding electricity, finding enough electricity, routing our cords, and what we can do so that we're not tripping circuits or GFIs, and what we do if that does happen. How do we determine how much power is available at a house? What we do with this is we call it assessing guess. Basically, we're going to do an evaluation, just looking around and seeing how many outlets that we have, the different locations of the outlets, proximity of the outlets, how close they are to each other. And at that point, we're just going to kind of decide how we're going to split up the power, how we're going to route the power. There's usually not a need to bring in an electrician unless you're doing a lot of lights. And by a lot of lights, I mean if you're doing 1,000 foot of C7, C9s, or you're doing a couple hundred mini lights, that sort of thing. That's when you need to let the customer know, hey, there's a possibility that we're going to have to get an electrician in here. That's going to cost an additional $100 per hour, or whatever it's going to cost for upgrades. If we can't get it to where you want, we'll let you know that there's going to be a problem, and you can decide whether or not you want to go to the additional cost of electrician or not. That's what you're going to tell the customer. So it's pretty easy. Like I said, most of the time it's not going to be a big concern. These houses should have plenty of power for you to run the lights that you want. Just when the estimator's out or the salesperson's out doing the estimating, they just need to look around. They need to make sure, if the guy wants 10 trees lit out in the yard, there needs to be power available somewhere out in that yard, or at least the ability to run it from the garage and it's not super far off, or from the side of the house. So it's really just looking at that and determining it while you're out there doing the estimate. And as we're going to learn what we're doing the sales and marketing side of things, when I'm doing the training on that, you're going to kind of guide the customer in the direction based on what they do have and the capabilities of their house. You don't want to oversell a job when they don't have the power requirements, unless it's a big house, they want a lot of lights. You know, if they're going to spend $5,000 or $10,000 on lights, I guarantee you they're not going to have a problem paying $500 or $1,000 to an electrician to come out and make some changes on their panel that are going to be permanent, and it'll be for the lifetime of that house. They don't have to worry about it ever being done again. Now, as far as determining amp draw, the way you do that, the calculation is watts divided by 110 volts equals amps. So watts divided by 110 is going to equal your amps. So for example, if we had 200 5-watt C7 bulbs, that's going to end up being 1,000 watts. We're going to divide that by 110, and we're going to end up with 9.09 amps. So basic equation, this you can use for all the different types of lights that you're using. And it's a calculation that you definitely want all of your guys knowing, especially your crew leaders. And you should, even the estimators, the sales guys should have a certain understanding of that. Now, the great thing about working with LED lights is that there's very little concern with power when using them. I mean, almost none. You could run thousands of lights or LED lights at somebody's house or commercial property and not have to worry about the power draw. It's just so minimal as compared to incandescent lights. Again, like we were talking about earlier, though, the drawback is they are a lot more expensive. They're a lot better to work with. They're going to last a lot longer, but it's just more of an investment. Okay, so let's talk about the order that we want you to look for outlets. The first spot to look for outlets is going to be in the eaves of the roof lines. You do need to make sure that they work, though, because that can be a problem sometimes. A customer, a lot of times, if they haven't done Christmas lights before, they've never used them, or they don't know where the switch is. If they do know where the switch is and you're going to use power from the eaves, it's very important that they know if you're going to put a timer on it, they must make sure that that switch stays on. Because if you put a timer on there, their little kid goes and turns it off or whatever, or somebody turns it off, that's going to be a problem because the timers are going to get off. They're going to be like out of sync. They're not going to be timed correctly because somebody hit the switch, and then that's how a timer obviously works. Is it's plugged in, it's keeping time, and then it's turning the lights on when they're supposed to come on. Well, if that power outlet gets switched off, it's not going to keep time anymore, and the lights are going to be coming on at 12 in the afternoon instead of 5 at night, and they'll be going off at 5 at night instead of midnight. So that's something to consider with the eaves. Another great spot to look for power are the front porches. Another good spot is the rear patios. Outside of the garage, inside of the garage, if you have to go in, you can run a cord outside the door, underneath the garage door. It'll still usually shut. Any other external outlets, there might be outlets on the side of the house. There could be outlets by a barbecue grill. A lot of times gates, like we were talking about before, the swinging gates, the electric ones, those will have an outlet on them. And a lot of times, if people have a lot of landscaping, they'll have the outlet duplexes just right out in the middle of the yard in a flower bed. So just anywhere you can find, ask the customer. They're going to usually know where all their outlets are. But any other type of external would be good. And then lastly, if you have to go inside the house or the laundry room, you can always run your X wire out through a window. You can run it out through a door. It's pretty thin. The X wire is pretty thin. So that's kind of your last resort. You don't want to have to get power from there. But if you absolutely have to, then you can. If you're decorating windows, even jumping up to roof lines and that sort of thing. Most every job that you install is going to require timers. The customer's paying good money, obviously, to have their lights installed. They're not going to want to have to go plug them in. Sometimes it's going to be in spots where they can't even plug it in because it might be up on the eaves or somewhere else like that we talked about. So with that being said, you are going to use timers. You should always have plenty of timers on hand. And unless a customer specifically says that they don't want to have timers, then you always want to include timers in the estimate and make sure that you set everything to timers for the customer. So you're going to have indoor timers, which you can use in garages. That's pretty much the only place, or maybe a utility closet. Actually, even like on a barbecue, anywhere that's going to be protected from the weather, you could use an indoor timer. It doesn't have to be inside the house, but it does have to be in a weatherproof area where it's not going to get rained on or snowed on or anything like that. The other type are going to be the outdoor timers. On the lower left here, we have the digital timers. There's timers out there that are going to be photo, or like the one on the right are the photocell timer. So the one on the left is the green one there. That's actually digitally set, and that's specific to hours and specific times. The one in the middle is a manual timer, and that one you just set it and you put those little green and red tabs for the on and off times, and you just that manually clicks on. And then one to the right, the far right there, that's actually one that's photocell based. So you're going to be able to set it to come on dawn to dusk, or different increments of time, like 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours after after it first gets dark. So if you're using those are fine to use. Just make sure that they don't get in an area where they'll directly get hit by the lights when they come on. Because what will happen is the photocell, we've had this happen before, where the photocell actually picks up on the light and it turns the lights off. So they're going on and off blinking, and it's because of the timer. But just talk to your local reps about that, the master licensees. I'm sure they've had experiences with all these different types of timers, and you guys can discuss that more. The one thing that I will tell you, if you're using manual timers, like digital or the manual type that we have here, the left, the first one on the left, or the one in the middle, you want to always set those about a half hour before it gets dark. That way, if you have multiple timers, even if they're not exactly in sync, by the time it gets dark, all the lights will be on. So if they come on in sections, that's okay, but not once it's already dark. So if it gets dark where you're at 5 o'clock, then I'd like to have you guys have all the lights set to come on at 4:30, just to make sure that they are all on when it gets dark. And another important thing, do not overload the timers. Keep in mind, if you need to know how many amps they're capable of holding, like these indoor timers, I think they're usually like 7 amp, sometimes 10 amp. And then the outdoor timers usually are 15 amp. But you need to make sure that you're not overloading those. I've seen timers melted before. That's probably the biggest fire hazard that I've seen, is when installers are out there overloading these timers. So just be aware, just use your conversion that we talked about, the total watts divided by 110, and anything that you have plugging into that line, you should easily be able to figure that, and just don't ever exceed, I'd say stay about maybe a half of a amp below what the maximum is. All right, so let's just take a minute to talk about routing cords. I'm not going to get into very much detail on this, because this is something that is another one of those things that's a lot easier to show you out in the field and explain it out in the field. But a few things that I will tell you that you want to watch for. You want to make sure that when you're crossing over pathways or driveways, that the lights are, that the cords are glued down or taped down, so that they don't present some sort of a tripping hazard. That's pretty much common sense. The problem when you tape them, you can use duct tape and it'll last a little while, but if it's in a rainy climate, it will pill up. So the best thing for you to do is probably find a groove that you can run it across in the driveway or the pathway. Put some, use a hot glue gun, put some dabs of glue down, put the cord down in there, and then that'll usually last for the whole season. Another thing with cords, like if you're running across a yard and you want it to be more taut and tighter to the ground, then you can use sod stakes. So you can just go to Home Depot or Lowe's, ask for the sod stakes, or they're called sod stakes or sod staples. It's just like a U-shaped piece of metal, and you just hammer that right down, and that'll keep it nice and tight on the ground. That would probably protect it quite a bit from landscapers and gardeners as well. So now another thing with routing cords, and this is something we're going to show you, you want to be real careful that your crew members aren't going up and like doing anything funky, like tying them around gutters, because a downspout in a gutter is a great place to hide a cord when coming down. But if it's tied to that, which I've seen plenty of knuckleheads go out there and do this, they tie it around thinking it needs to be hurricane proof or something, and then they run it down. Well, now that means somebody's got for the removal of the lights when you're doing the takedown. Instead of you probably being able to just yank those down and get those lights down from the ground or from a small step ladder and use an extension pole, you got to get a big ladder out off the truck, and it just presents it's just a big pain in the butt that's not necessary. So again, we'll get into more of this cord routing stuff out in the field in the next couple of days. Just wanted to touch on it a little bit. Saving time is going to be crucial in the Christmas light business, in many cities, it's not how many jobs you're going to be able to get, but how many you can actually handle. Anything you can do before you get to a job site, whether it's the day before, the night before, or before the season begins, is going to help you to generate higher profits. For instance, if you have a commercial roof line that you plan on doing with C9s, make up several strands of light line at the maximum length, label them, and then place them in a tub ready to be stretched out and installed. Now, that would obviously be if you weren't stapling them, which most commercial applications, you're not going to be stapling them. You're just going to be using either the incandescent or LED bulbs, and you'll be using the shingle tab with the parapet clip, or more than likely and hopefully you'll be using the LED magnetic lights, which are going to save you a ton of time, like we talked about before. So some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here in the next few slides is going to be it's very important. It's going to save you a lot of time and money. So please try to follow these as closely as you can. And if you have any questions, just either let me know or your master licensee know. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you to begin with is always work from the roof. In dry, warm climates, your employees should work from the roof anytime that they can. Working from the roof is going to be much faster than it is working from a ladder. You know, whenever you're on a ladder, you got to walk up, then you got to walk down, and you're probably going to get about maybe a maximum of about 3, maybe 4 feet on each side. But then you got to go back down that ladder. You got to move the ladder. So anytime that you can work from the roof, you want to be up on the roof, as long as it's safe and as long as it's not real slippery. And then we're going to get into it here in a second, but you can also use harnesses if you're on a steep pitch, although that's going to require the use of 2 people, because one person's going to be holding the harness, keeping it secure, and the other person's going to be hanging the lights. But bottom line, if it's safe to work from the roof, that's where you should be. It's going to be a lot faster. Now, I don't want you to work on the roof or from the roof if it's slippery. So just make sure, I mean, I know that the shake shingles, the wood shingles, the tiles, it's all going to be different. I mean, obviously some of the roofs can be wet and they still won't be slippery. If you're in areas where you're on like a shake type roof, there's some products called Cougar Paws that are great. They were actually brought to our attention by our Atlanta master licensees, so they've had a lot of experience using them. And if you have any questions on them, you can just ask them, give them a call, or you can ask me about it as well. So that's a product that is on our website. It's one of the links. And again, those are called Cougar Paws, and they're really good for working on the shake roofs, from what I understand. Now, if the pitch is steep enough to create a dangerous situation, don't work from the roof unless you're going to be secured by a harness. Always remember the downsloping parts of the roof are the most dangerous. I know that might sound like common sense, but sometimes people just don't think about it. You know, obviously it's downsloping. It's easier for gravity to pull you down. So always take that in consideration. Determine if the roof tiles, if you're on tiles, are made of material strong enough to support your weight. When walking on roof tiles, always place your foot on the bottom 2 inches of the tile, where it overlaps the tile beneath it. This is the strongest point. If your foot shifts more than about 5 inches up the tile, this is an area with no support and your foot will crash through the tile, forming a hole. Essentially, you'll break the tile. On Spanish tile roofs, walk in the gullies that are near the bottom 2 inches of the tile. When walking on any tile, step slowly and distribute your weight evenly between both feet. Bottom line is, if it's a tile roof, you really want to have, even in general, guys that you can hire, number one, they need to be experienced at working on roofs or in trees up at heights. And number two, try to get guys that aren't huge. I mean, I'm 240 pounds. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'5", and I'm not the kind of guy that you want up on a roof. So you want to get the guys that are small and wiry, call them like the catwalkers. They're going to be faster up there, and they're just going to do a much better job. They're going to be quicker, and they're not going to break tiles if you're in that situation. Now, like I said, also, it's extremely important that you let people know when you're interviewing people, when you're in the hiring process, that they need to not have a fear of heights. A lot of people, they need a job. They're going to tell you whatever it takes to get that job. So that's why I say it's best to refer back to people that have experience and can actually prove that they've been in the roofing industry or window washing, pressure washing, jobs that require them to get up onto ladders and up on the roofs. But regardless, once they get out in the field, you'll find out the first day, and there's no room for people that we call them ground squirrels, people that we find out that basically they lied, and you can just tell by the way that they're working that they're afraid of heights. Hey, it's not a bad thing. Ironically, I don't like heights. I'm more of the sales and marketing guy. My partner has no fear of heights, no problem with it, but just something for you guys to think about when you're doing the hiring. All right, so now let's talk about how we can prevent things from tripping our GFIs and circuit breakers while we're doing the install. Like we talked about before, when you're installing the lights, I want you to always have them on. And then secondly, I want you to have them plugged into a GFCI extension cord adapter. Every member of the crew should have those, and they should be using them always when they're working. Now, obviously, you're not going to leave that adapter there at the customer's house. So when you get ready to finish, you're going to plug them directly into the outlet, or more than likely plug them into a timer that's plugged into the outlet. These are really good. These GFI extension cords, they're going to save you. First of all, it's a good safety tool. Secondly, it's going to save you a lot of time and money just by the fact that you're going to eliminate tripping GFIs, and you're going to eliminate tripping the circuit breakers in the panel. So, if you let's say that somebody drives a staple through, or they're overloading a circuit, and then the breaker trips. Well, in California, it's not that big of a deal because all the panels are outside, at least in Southern California. They're generally like right outside by the garage door, by the side door entrance. But most parts of the country where there's actually weather issues, they're going to be inside. So they're going to be inside like in a utility closet, in a master bedroom, in an area that you don't want to have to go find it. You don't want to have to stop working. You might blow a circuit that everybody's working off of, and then everybody's at a standstill, or they're installing lights the way that they shouldn't be, which is installing lights with them turned off. So just take my advice on these. It's something we've debated over the years, kind of going back and forth, but we've definitely decided that this is something that you should have. Every crew member should have one, and this is the way that you should run the installations. Takedown is definitely something that you should be thinking about while you're doing the install. Your crew leaders need to definitely be very, very aware of how the installers are putting lights up, and stapling them or with the clips, however they're doing it. They need to be aware and really watching these guys until they get to the point that they can trust them to do things correctly. Because I tell you, if people are putting things up the wrong way and wrapping things around downspouts, putting tons of staples in, putting cords over roofs, it's going to take so much longer to take these lights down. Now, everything you and your employees install should be done so, keeping in mind that you will not want to use a ladder when you go back for takedown. Ideally, if you can get it with an extension pole and avoid taking the big ladder off the truck, that's going to save you a lot of time. Remember, takedown should always be a much faster process than installing the lights. You're going to be taking down, I'd say, around 5 times the number of jobs in a day than you put up when you're doing the installs. So here's some of the most common things that your employees will do during an installation that can make takedown longer. Watch for these and train your employees not to do them. Again, wrapping cords around downspouts. Number 2, go under cross members in the gutters. So just the little the bolts and the cross members that go underneath the gutters, or I'm sorry, actually within the gutters. That can be a big problem. Like I said, some of these guys think that they're having to secure it for a hurricane, and it's just ridiculous, some of the stuff that you'll see. Go over the roof with extension cords. Sometimes this is necessary, but if you start allowing the crew guys to do it once, then they're often going to make a habit out of it and looking first to run the power that way. Just kind of a lazy way of getting power when there's other ways to get it. But hey, let's just throw this cord over the roof. It's not going to be a big deal. Well, it's not a big deal until it comes time for takedown, and it's more of a pain to get that cord off of the roof. And again, using too many staples. I can show you pictures of jobs that the guys just went nuts with the staples. All those staples have to be taken out. And also, if something's stapled really hard up into the fascia board, it's going to be hard to pull the lights down, and you might end up ripping the strands and then having to pull the ladder out. So again, there are going to be definitely jobs that you will have to get the ladder out. I'm not saying that all jobs you're not going to have that, they're not going to require a ladder for the takedown, but you don't, as many as possible, you don't want to have to pull the ladder out. So just get your guys trained on this stuff. And this is something that you guys can talk about more with your master licensees. The most important thing is safety. You don't want people to get hurt. You're working with electricity. You're working with ladders. You're having people up on the roofs. And the last thing you want to do is burn somebody's house down or have a guy fall off of a roof or a ladder, something like that happens. So it's easy to avoid those situations, but you do have to have some safety procedures in place. Rule number one, you're dealing with electricity. Never take chances, never overload, never get complacent. As professional installers, it's wise not to not go beyond the recommended parameters of all the electrical products you're using. Kind of like I said, if something says it's capable of handling 10 amps, then I would go 9.5. I would just do a half an amp less on whatever you're running, whether it's cords, light line, timers, all that kind of stuff. That's going to keep you on the safe side. So just, obviously you've got liability in doing this. And also, you don't want to endanger people's lives. So we're going to teach you how to do this stuff responsibly. Just follow the guidelines that we set forth for you, and you're going to be just fine. Now let's talk a little bit about ladder safety first. You're going to usually find information stickers on the side of every ladder. I think it's a really good idea to have your employees read the stickers before they climb a ladder. Obviously, just the first time before they do it, that could be something that you take them through in an orientation. I think it's just a good precursor to safety, and it kind of covers your butt in case anything was to happen. Always determine the safest angle in which to place a ladder. The best way to determine a safe angle is to stand on the ground with your toes firmly against the side rails as if you were spotting the ladder. Then reach straight out without bending. Allow your fingertips to touch the rung directly in front of you. An individual should not set foot on a ladder without setting the ladder properly himself. You don't want to rely on the spotter to do this. You want to, if you're the guy climbing the ladder, you want to set it yourself. So again, just walk up, get an angle, put it out, kind of lean it up against that roof line, and just make sure that there's not much wiggling. It doesn't seem off balance before you go up that ladder. You want to make sure that you do that. And we're going to have a little video that we'll watch here in a second that also gets into some of the ladder safety. And that could be something that you might want to show to some of your installers before they go out in the field for the first time, if there's time for you to do that. Now we'll talk about spotting ladders. So I'm talking about the person that is holding the ladder for the person that's going up and actually working on the ladder. We call that a spotter. There are two key issues when it comes to spotting ladders in this business. The first and most obvious one is spotting the ladder in an unsafe situation. So like basically if an employee is working on an uneven or slippery surface, even if it's not that high up, that's going to require a spotter. So maybe it's up against a tree, it's kind of at a weird angle, it's just slippery, then you definitely need to have a spotter. The other time is you should definitely have a spotter anytime somebody's working at 28 feet or higher. Then you're going to want to have somebody down there holding the ladder, even if well, you wouldn't want to be working at that height if it was uneven. It just wouldn't be safe to do. So I'd like to point that out. But just as a general rule of thumb, if it's going to be 28 feet or higher, make sure that you have a spotter accounted for in that. Anytime a person is spotting a ladder, they must take extreme caution in watching for anything that could possibly fall from the worker's tool belt or hands. It's very common for workers to drop staplers while installing Christmas lights. To prevent this from happening, you can try tethering all of your tools to the work belts. That's a really good idea. And then another good idea is to have a hard hat on hand that your spotter could wear. Because, I mean, trust me, a stapler falling down from 28, 30 feet, if it hit somebody right, could probably kill them. Regardless, no matter what, it's going to be a big lump on somebody's head and it's not going to feel good. So take that all into consideration, please. Another thing, transporting ladders. Make sure that all ladders are securely strapped down prior to leaving the warehouse or job site. Tie-down straps can all be purchased at Home Depot or Lowe's, and the crew leader should always check ladders prior to driving. So that's great. Have the crew strap it down, but definitely the crew leader, that should be the last thing he does before he leaves, is checks those ladders. We've all seen ladders on the side of the freeway, on the side of the road. It's a common thing. I mean, people just forget it. So I don't know how you want to have these guys remember. I don't know if you want to have a checklist or something. That's something we talked about putting into place. We really haven't ever developed like a formal way of implementing something like that, like a checklist. But I think you just got to drill it into these crew leaders' heads every time before you leave. Check the ladders. Check the ladders. Make sure that they're tight. They might look like they're on there good, but they may actually not be. So they need to actually physically go out there and feel it. Okay, we're just about wrapped up with the installation side of things, and we're going to move on to the sales and marketing. But I wanted to show you a picture of what would be classified as like a difficulty level 4. So, and we'll get more into the difficulty levels here in a little bit when we're doing the estimating procedures. But you can see this is requiring two people. It's a very steep pitch. I know from looking at other pictures of this house that it's very tall. So it's a tall house, something that definitely you don't want somebody falling off of. And in this situation, it's going to be a lot slower because we do have two people working. They're having to work together. You got the guy up there at the top that's secured himself, and he's kind of the lifeline for the guy that's actually installing the lights down there at the bottom. And the closer that that guy gets to the end of that pit or to the roof line on that down facing slope, that's where it's going to be more dangerous. It's really not that bad working your way up. It's just going down, like I said, that tendency for the gravity can get you easier, and you trip a little bit or whatever, and it's all over. So this is a situation where you would need a harness. And why don't you guys go ahead and talk a little bit more about different situations with the master licensees that might require a harness?